Every time you cross blades, every time you engage in a competitive situation, you are reenacting a life-death situation. You're reenacting the duel where somebody lives and somebody dies. You don't really die physically, but you can undergo an ego death, ego loss. And the death is the loss of self-limitation, things that hold you back. The rebirth is new knowledge, grave awareness.
Maestro D'Asaro, Maestro.
Micheal D'Asaro lived a complex life that doesn't fit nicely into a conventional narrative. But that was the point. He didn't live his life to fit anyone's expectations.
He was a very complex person. You couldn't stick him in a pigeonhole. You could try, but it wouldn't work.
At the core, though, there was one constant: fencing.
You can learn all of life's lessons through fencing. It's everything you can learn through fencing. Fencing is a microcosm of life.
Fencing was Michael's purpose in life.
I cannot find anybody who's loved fencing so much how Mike D'Asaro.
D'Asaro was a world champion fencer, and then he wasn't. He was a hugely successful college coach, and then he wasn't. Micheal D'Asaro's greatest opponent was always Micheal D'Asaro, and he lost more bouts than he won. Or did he? If you think of Micheal D'Asaro as an artist, then his medium was the sport of fencing, and how he expressed that art was in a constant state of flux between destruction and construction, whether on himself or on his students. He would destroy his assumptions about what fencing was in order to find new ways to express himself, a Jungian process of death and rebirth.
He had his long hair. He was in a competition in San Francisco, and he was covered in rings of skulls. He had ring skulls and a necklace with skulls, and I'd walk up to him. He didn't even say hi. He just goes, "Death before rebirth."
It was a process D'Asaro would embrace from the very beginning.
Well, I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York.
Stro wasn't D'Asaro's first nickname. As a child, his family gave him a slightly less prestigious moniker.
When he was born, my mother said, I'm not going to call him Michael, and I'm not going to call him Anthony. And he was chubby as a baby, so my mother said, I'm going to call him Chubby. And growing up through the years, that's what I called him, Chubby. And when he went to college, and they'd say, can I speak to Michael? I'd put the phone down and say, hey, Chubby, you got a phone call.
D'Asaro grew up with his mom, dad, and sister in the projects in the Redhook section of Brooklyn.
Life in Redhook during the 50s, it was a rough neighborhood.
The projects were a horrible living environment, small places and people one on top of the other and a lot of gangs.
I had learned carte parry in a very little French sort of way, and it was kind of like this delicate technical thing. It's like, no! This could be your life! And I just remember him taking my hand and kind of slapping it across to demonstrate that it was about blocking something.
He had a cut on the inside of his left wrist.
He was out and about somewhere, and a rival gang cornered him. And somebody took out a knife and tried to stab him, and he parried it.
And he would always tell people that it was his first parry.
And he's got the scar to show for it.
I got scars all over my body from knife wounds.
You were either in a gang or you were going to get hit by the gang.
Michael came of age as a street-smart gang member.
Michael was part of a group called the Redhook Stompas.
And his initiation was he had to cut somebody.
He was supposed to get 4 inches of blood onto the blade of a knife of the rival gang. He had found this guy that he was a rival with the opposite gang, and he got on top of the guy and he's straddling the guy.
He said he didn't want to hurt the man.
He knew he could just stab him in the chest or something and kill him.
It gets one of those Stro flashes of illumination, flips the guy over.
And he stuck him in his gluteus.
Stabbed him in the butt.
Which is brilliant because, yeah, that's not lethal. He's gonna get his 4 inches of blood. And that was just so Stro.
I was in high school and we had 9th period gym.
I hated gym. Gym was like the worst fucking thing you can do.
I said, well, if you went out for sport, then you go to practice. You don't have to go to gym. great, I'll go out for sport.
It's easier to cut out of team practice than it is out of a class.
But I was never really good enough to make, high school team.
And fencing, they're always looking for a warm body.
So I saw all the movies and all. Yeah, I'd like to do that.
I was left-handed, aggressive, mean, nasty kid.
First thing that came to his mind was, hey, this can help my knife fighting.
Maybe I could pick up a point or two with fighting with switchblades.
He was very taken by it.
And I was like really good.
Probably the first time in my life I have a feeling of success.
Up until that point, so I was good, but I was talented.
So it was like a shark tasting blood. The more I tasted, the more I wanted.
He did give me this idea that fencing had saved his life.
Here was something that he was doing in one area where it was not good to do, and then there he is on the fencing strip, and it's totally affirmed.
Because you mean I can whack somebody upside the head, and I get credit, and I can stay in high school, and I can graduate?
People patting me on the back, shaking my hand, giving me medals. I got totally hooked and totally involved in fencing. It's been my whole life.
D'Asaro attended Alexander Hamilton High School in Brooklyn. His high school won the championship the first year he fenced. He placed third individually.
It's one of those tough kind of schools, not like Forest Hills, we were all gentlemen.
The high schools that had fencing teams would meet and compete on Saturday mornings.
We went to a competition, a high school competition, and there was Mike.
I had to fence Mike. He killed me. He hit me from what seemed to me a mile away.
He excelled in the sport of fencing, and actually from that got him out of that area. There was a life after Redhook.
Before D'Asaro left Redhook and went off to college, he married his high school sweetheart, Leonora Federico.
They were married at a high mass.
The whole entire fencing team stood up and they made, I call it a canopy. They put all their swords up and then they walked through. Wow, I thought I was watching a movie.
Michael, if I understand the story correctly, was considered one of the top prospects, high school prospects in the country.
But I wasn't really interested in college. I just wanted to get out, earn some money, spend some money, have a good time. That didn't last too long. After about 6-7 months, it was boring. I wasn't enjoying myself. Applied again at the universities. I was accepted by NYU.
NYU had a great reputation as for their fencing teams, and it was because Hugo basically corralled all the young, good fencers from high school.
Not many people left Redhook and excelled, so getting into NYU was a big deal.
So we had a scholarship, right through, our entire college careers.
We all started out as foil fencers.
There was no épée or saber fencing. That only started once you got to college.
There are 3 weapons in fencing: foil, épée, and saber.
A saber is a kind of equipment that you can slash, you can stab, and you can duel with.
The saber is the only weapon for which a touch can be scored with a cut, but you can score a hit anywhere on the body with the cutting edge, with the end third of the back edge, or with the point, anywhere above a line, a theoretic line, where the legs meet the body when you are in an on-guard position.
Back and forth, cutting, slashing, controlled chaos. This is what saber is about.
Foil fencing is basically you hit with the point of the foil and you hit anywhere on the torso.
But not head, not arms, not legs.
It was really meant in the old days as a practice weapon for the dueling swords, which would be saber and épée.
Includes right-of-way. The attacker has right-of-way.
You're obliged, obligated to parry an attack because you would do that if there was no tip on the blade, because you'd want to protect yourself first.
At the time I started fencing, foil was the only choice for women.
Épée is a dueling sword. The whole body is target.
Contrary to what you see in the movies, the idea is not to hit the other guy's blade, but it's actually to stab the other guy. And in épée fencing, you can hit him anywhere from head to toe.
Épée is basically where each touch, each point that's scored is like a mini duel to first blood, where whoever of the 2 opponents hits the other one first gets the point, or
you can have a simultaneous touch in épée where you can't have a simultaneous touch in foil or saber.
You see somebody fencing, and whoever stabs the other guy first, that's sort of épée fencing.
You know, Hugo Costello was the coach at NYU, and he would say, okay, Gene, you can continue to fence foil, but you, Mike, you're going to fence saber.
We needed a saber guy. There was an opening. He was a good fencer. Did he object? Not at all.
The first year D'Asaro was on the New York University fencing team, the NYU Violets won the National Collegiate Championship.
We went 4 straight years never losing a match.
And they were far and away the best.
And we were always in contention for either first or second, the National Collegiate Championships, the Eastern Intercollegiate Championships. We thought we'd never lose a bout.
We had an attitude that we would win.
But whenever we lost, it was viewed as an accident.
They were so good, they didn't think about the score. What they did was time the bouts.
One time there was a contest that had Gene, Mike, and Herb Cohen on who could win a bout the fastest.
Mike has the record for the fastest bout, which was 12 seconds, but he got hit once. And of course, when he got off the strip, even though he broke the record because we kept track of him, 12 seconds. All right, Mike, 12 seconds, that's good, but you got hit. He said, well, what do you want me to do? I can't parry.
For over 40 years, Hungarian maestro Csaba Eltes was the dean of American saber fencing. In 1958, D'Asaro met with Eltes to see if Eltes would help with D'Asaro's training.
Csaba had all the saber fences. He was the most unique coach that had all the competitors were all his students.
He was a very tough guy, very hard lessons.
If you didn't do something right, you would get the whack on the leg.
Csaba would take off his mask and say, Mr. Sir, I tell you, do it this way. To put his mask back on and go through the action again. The third time, before he took off his mask, Csaba would whack him across the knee. And then he'd take off his mask and said, Mr. Sir, I give you 3 chances.
So Mike was, a great talent without any real discipline. I think I was sort of the leader of that, to go to Mike and say, Mike, why don't you join us and meet Csaba Eltes? He was reluctant. We went to Csaba and we said, hey, we've got this friend of ours who's really very, very good. Csaba agreed, says, bring him down. Mike agreed, he'll come. Reluctantly.
He really thought he was some kind of hot shot as a fencer.
So we bring Mike up to Sal Santelli, and Csaba is going to give him a lesson.
He went in there thinking, okay, this is some, big name European coach, but I'm fast, I'm strong, I'm great, I'm gonna really impress this guy.
Csaba starts to give him this lesson, and it was terrible to watch.
Csaba just tore him apart.
When Mike didn't do something right, it's, again, he just in a t-shirt, smack him. Csaba keeps saying, you are stupid, you don't know what you're doing.
It was very humbling, I'm sure, for Michael at that time.
Afterwards, Mike he's almost in tears. I go to Csaba and I say, what do you think? And Csaba says, this is one of the great talents I have ever seen. And when I went to Mike and said, Mike, Csaba thinks you're this fantastic talent, he said, it's not true, it's not true.
Csaba Eltes told me, he said, you know what? Micheal D'Asaro was the most talented fencer I ever saw.
Even though Michael was anti-establishment and rebel, he admired Csaba. I'd say he loved Csaba.
Csaba taught him the game, taught him the technique, taught him the politics, but also taught him how to think by himself.
The most beautiful lessons of any student were Michael's. People would stop and watch the lesson. And then they'd stop and, people would.
It was interesting to watch over a period of time from this raw, great fencer to this really good-looking classical Hungarian saber fencer.
Michael looked like the book said you ought to look.
Remember Michael Jordan? Everybody wants to be like Mike. Well, this was another Mike, okay? Everybody wanted to be like Mike.
It didn't happen overnight. 1958 and 1959 were down years for D'Asaro as Csaba Eltes completely rebuilt his saber skills. But that didn't mean he couldn't be successful in other weapons.
Yeah, the Pan American Games. I think he was second in epee.
Something happened. He screwed up in saber, and then he's like took an epee and then beat everybody.
He trained in no other weapon than saber. That's all he did. And he only, when it was required, said, okay, I'll fence foil. Okay, I'll fence epee.
But you see his movement and his distance and his timing, and that was always great. He could certainly hold his own in epee.
He was probably the greatest three-weapon fencer from my era.
They knew him as a saber fencer. What's he doing being a world-class epee or foil fencer?
He was not a classical hand-touch epee guy. He had a couple of good sneaky shots.
I don't know how he did all these weapons.
So those of us that made the finals in the 1959 Nationals were put on the Pan Am team, one of whom on the epee team was Jim Margolis, and he got hurt. Mike was practicing with us. He was a saber fencer, one of the best in the country. I don't know if it was me or who it was, but I sort of thought he would be great to be on the epee team.
When he took that epee medal, I certainly wasn't surprised. I'd seen him fence epee.
Roland Womack was untouchable. He probably was 2 bouts ahead of everybody when we finished for the gold. So Mike was in there close with everybody else. And if he got silver, we were way ahead of everybody on that. So everybody got to say they won a gold medal.
In 1959, D'Asaro and the NYU Violets lost to the Navy midshipmen in the NC2A championship. Navy swept the top 3 individual prizes as well in foil, epee, and saber.
Al Morales was the young bronzed god of fencing. The rivalry between Al Morales and Micheal, the collegiate rivalry, was virtually legendary.
Mike and clearly Al Morales from Navy were the best of the crop.
In all my fencing with D'Asaro, I was well above 50% with him.
Even as a plebe, he would get out and make me practice with him most days because his 2 great rivals were Micheal and a lefty from Columbia, Stuart Reuter.
He had handled me fairly easily the first time we fenced because I didn't know much about fencing.
I remember him as technically being one of the most enjoyable fencers to watch, especially compared to Al Morales, who had his own invented style, which was not aesthetically pleasing.
I wasn't as pretty a fencer as he was, but I was always smarter than he was.
In 1960, NYU returned the favor to the midshipmen. They beat Navy in the college championships, and this time, NYU took all 3 individual top spots. D'Asaro took first in saber by beating Al Morales.
59, it was Navy, all 3 plus the national championship. The following year, they flipped around. NYU was champion and Navy was second.
Mike, I think, beat Al to win the NCAAs in their senior year in college. It was a very long bout. Came from behind and finally beat him by 1.
My matchup with Mike was pretty good. I won most of them.
Fencing's all a game of deception. And he was very good at sort of hiding those skills.
There were tricks that the fencers would use. One of the tricks that Mike learned, and this happened when we came back in the NCAA championships.
Gene and I are watching Mike fence, and he's on the strip with a guy named Parmachek. Parmachek launches an attack and is going for Mike's head, and Mike comes up to parry it.
And the guy does a feint, and it crack right across his, right across his ribs.
2 hands go up. There are judges. It's not electric.
Mike grabs his leg
in agony.
The judges' heads, they're about to award, they saw start to come down.
Maybe it wasn't a good touch.
I think it was good. And the other guy said, I don't think so. The director says, well, throw it out.
Mike picks up his weapon. The director says, ready, fence. He goes, wait. And we reveled in his getting that touch thrown out.
In 1960, both Al Morales and Micheal D'Asaro were selected to go to Rome as part of the United States fencing team for the Olympics.
In order to try to build up a fencing structure within this country, instead of depending, as we did at that time, on Hungarians, was to have both Al and Micheal fence in the individual competition.
Al got knocked out pretty soon, and Mike kept going. He made a good presentation of himself.
Team, on the other hand, took 4th and did it by beating the Russians.
So it came down to really D'Asaro and I had to win a bout, and that was not a given against the Russians. I think they got nervous because it wasn't going exactly the way they wanted, but D'Asaro won a bout and I won a bout, and we beat the Russians, which was a major thing.
And that was like unheard of.
It put us fourth in the Olympics, which is unusual.
In '61, we were invited to the Sabre invitation thing in Warsaw.
This was the first time that an American team had been asked because the team had finished fourth in the '60 Olympics.
These were the best fencers from these other countries.
I fenced well, and Mike fenced spectacularly.
Mike had a very good result. In fact, I think he had the best result.
The world of fencing was a gentleman's world that he was reaching toward.
Told stories of, about meeting Nazlimov and fencing Nazlimov and beating Pawlowski in Poland. I mean, this is in their home turf, and no other poor kid from the streets has done it. No American has ever done it.
It was, I think, the second year we were in Warsaw, which would have been '62. He was attracted to some pretty Polish woman, but she didn't speak any English, and he didn't speak any Polish, but I spoke French, and she spoke French. So he had me talk with her, the three of us would sit there. He kept saying to her, well, we tell her, I want to take her out. No. And he said, if I beat Pawlowski, when you go out if you beat Pawlowski, sure.
Not too many people can say that they beat Jerzy Pawlowski.
Then he beat Pawlowski. Each touch he scored, it was a close bout, but each touch he scored, he would point to her. The whole audience was aware of the fact that he was making a play for her attention. So we went out together. The three of us, I had to go along. I was a speaker. Paul Mackler said, you get him back. You want him in bed. Here we are with 6 or 7 Polish fencers, me not speaking a word of Polish, and some of them speaking English, and some speaking French. I kept saying, we got to go back. We got to get back to the hotel. We got to get back to the hotel. Finally, he said in a voice that anybody in whatever bar we were in could hear. He said, Bloom, he said, you train your fucking way, and I'll train mine. And so I got up and said goodnight and went back to the hotel. He fenced beautifully the next day.
After graduating from NYU, D'Asaro took a job at the Donahoe & Co. advertising firm.
I worked for about a year in an advertising agency in New York. I thought that was la-di-da, glamour and lots of money, and it wasn't any of that at all.
Fortunately or unfortunately, though, D'Asaro's fencing brought him to the attention of the U.S. military.
Pouchardou, who was something to do with the pentathlon coaches in San Antonio, he was able to get fencers to come and join his pentathlon training. But of course you had to join the Army.
Training for the Olympics and dying in Vietnam, yeah, he took the right choice.
The Army asked him to come on the team because they wanted his fencing skills.
He wasn't made for the military.
And he didn't even think he'd have to go to boot camp, but he had to go to boot camp.
He's in boot camp like everybody else. He says, wait a minute now, how far is this gonna go?
Could you imagine Michael in boot camp?
No, he wasn't too comfortable. And if he tried to talk to somebody like the sergeant told him, get back in line and shut your mouth.
So he went through boot camp and then he made the pentathlon team, and they didn't treat him very specially.
He really wasn't a pentathlete.
Mike D'Asaro on horseback. Mike D'Asaro swimming, Mike D'Asaro shooting.
His background was not one that you could put into pentathlon training. I mean, you see pictures of him on a horse, but he wasn't a good rider.
He hated running. He enjoyed shooting.
He couldn't shoot.
He didn't like to swim. He loved the horses.
You don't learn how to ride a horse cross country 5,000 meters at a gallop with 18 or 20 obstacles overnight. They just expected him to help with the fencing. And he was invaluable for that.
That he actually won one of these skirmishes. That means horseback riding, shooting, running, and fencing.
But a lot of times we would be fencing epee. He and I would fence saber because we wanted to keep the saber skills up.
I'm surprised Michael lasted as long as he did in the Army. He was not great on authoritarianism.
I think he liked that. He certainly looked good. I think he probably was in the best shape of his life.
All that extra practice paid off for D'Asaro during his participation in the 1962 U.S. Nationals Fencing Championship.
the story of winning the nationals against Danny Magai. As you know, Danny Magai was a wonderful fencer and our national saber champion many times.
I didn't know much about him, but pretty quickly I found out in the final. He turned out to be an excellent fencer.
Michael said that the bout it was tied. I was probably 9-9. And I said, well, what did you do? And Michael said, well, I went direct to the head, of course. What else do you do?
It was a feint of head, and he finished on the chest.
That was sort of the crowning achievement of his career up until that point.
The most at sea he had ever been in his life was the week after he won the Nationals. All of a sudden, I had no purpose.
But the gold medal at the 1962 Nationals was just the beginning of a remarkable string of victories for D'Asaro.
What Ed talked about in those days when he was with Mike was the hotel room, drinking bouts, and then fencing the next day.
Michael can be asleep or drunk, and he still can beat anybody in the world.
We were in Vienna for a military championship.
They gathered the best talent that was in the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy.
The military world championships is a much bigger venue for fencing than the Olympics.
Michael established a pretty enviable record in those.
Michael happened to be the top winner as far as individual results.
We had a big banquet afterwards.
And Michael did everything to the extreme.
Mike had a few.
He was sitting right across from me on these long wooden tables. And he's happy and singing and drinking and singing and drinking. All of a sudden we're looking at it, I don't see Michael anywhere. So I looked down, he's underneath. He slid underneath the big table. We got a hold of Michael and we pulled him up and we kind of walked him outside and we were waiting for the little buses. Started to puke. Okay, so he puked on Al Davis's foot and I just kind of kept him away too, you know.
We had to take him, put him in the shower.
And he's objecting and he's begging not to kill him. And then we grab him and we put him on the bunk. So next morning comes and we wake him up and we have a tournament.
They grab Michael out of bed and they go, Michael, Michael! And he's like, yeah, what's going on? And they're like, Michael, it's time for your individual event.
We dress him, okay? And he's fencing foil.
Gets on the strip and he's having issues with hitting his opponent. And his coach yelled out, hit the one in the middle. As soon as he made that connection and he hit the person in the middle, then it was over.
He destroys this guy, and he destroys the guy after him and after him and after him.
He could barely walk, but once he got on that strip, boom, and he blew him out.
Michael won dual championship, won individual and the team championship.
Impossible. United States with their level of the fencing and winning in one this toughest competition in the world, amazing. Amazing thing only can do that, Mike.
And then in '63, I was captain of the Pan Am team in Sao Paulo, and Mike won the saber there. We won all the events.
The culmination of this remarkable string of accomplishments was a decisive bout against D'Asaro's idol, Jerzy Pawlowski, at the World Championships in Gdansk, Poland.
In those days, they had side judges behind each fencer, a referee. So basically an American fencing like the national hero of Poland during the Soviet communist days. This was not, gonna go well.
Pawlowski was his I'd say his hero. Probably the best saber fencer I'd ever seen.
Somehow, miraculously, the score is 9-9. Michael was going off and doing whatever. Then he scores his last touch. So like this hush in the crowd. And everybody oh. And then they make the call against Michael. And then, of course, everyone's cheering for Pawlowski because it's a Pawlowski thing. Pawlowski comes over and says, oh, sorry, Michael. And Michael goes and grabs him and gives him a kiss on the cheeks. And the crowd went absolutely nuts. They were yelling. Before, they were like, Pawlowski, Pawlowski. And all of a sudden, when this happened, the crowd turned around and they were yelling, D'Asaro, D'Asaro.
He's a guy that's being rooted for by the enemy.
And then the next day,
the fencing magazine in Poland with Micheal in a full lunge. Caption was that the American fencing team is so bad that Jesus Christ himself is now fencing for them.
These guys were born and bred to win Olympic gold medals and be the top in the sport. And this guy from Brooklyn comes out and just beats the crap out of them when they're not expecting it.
So what can be said about D'Asaro as a fencer?
He wasn't a bragger. He didn't say, I did this and I did that and I'm going here and I'm going there.
It was about the experience.
I think he let his fencing skills talk for him.
He would talk about other people's bouts as much as he talked about his own.
When he decided to make that hit, there was nothing stopping it. There might be some correlation between being a capable international level fencer and being willing to destroy people.
Micheal did have an edgy side, as do most successful competitors. This is a combative sport, and there's a fierceness that's needed, and Micheal's was not far from the surface.
I didn't see any games or anything, any referee baiting or any of those things. He just fenced.
Okay, they smoked some marijuana, but well, when they got on that strip and they were training, they were focused on one thing, and that was fencing.
The fact that he could fence with that stuff in him was doubly impressive, because these were not performance-enhancing drugs.
And when he took off his mask to shake your hands afterwards, he had the biggest grin on his face, even if he lost. Of course, he could fence every weapon, and he was modest about it, but he was a great guy to have on the team.
You knew that he was going to fence hard, which is all we asked for. So I would classify him as a good teammate, but I wouldn't say a great teammate.
He was supportive of everybody in the team, and we all liked watching him fence because he could beat anybody.
He wasn't a showboat, but he was showy. Absolutely, that's part of his style.
Which brings us to the 1964 Olympic team and D'Asaro's selection for that team. He won the 1962 Nationals, he won the 1963 Pan Am Games, and he won the 1963 Military World Championships. D'Asaro was the only American fencer to make it out of the pools and into direct elimination at the World Championships in Gdansk, Poland, where he was narrowly defeated by Jerzy Pawlowski. He had better international results than any other American saber fencer. If they used the same selection criteria they used for the Rome Olympics, it would appear D'Asaro was a lock to make the team going to Tokyo. But it was not to be. Rule changes made the selection process more merit-based. Your position on the team would now be derived from a new point system based on your results from national tournaments. In 1963, D'Asaro had a down year in the national tournaments. Despite the changes, D'Asaro still had enough points to be third on the national team competing in the Tokyo Olympics. Officials were so confident of D'Asaro's participation in the Olympics, D'Asaro was sent to Tokyo for an Olympic test event. Unfortunately, there was one more complication. The Hungarian fencers who had arrived in the United States after the 1956 Hungarian Revolution were now going to be allowed to fence for the U.S. team. The Hungarian fencers were given points to indicate how they potentially would have done if they were allowed to fence in the national qualifying events. Once the new numbers were added, D'Asaro slipped from third place on the team to second alternate. Micheal would not be going to the Olympics in Tokyo in 1964. By 1965, it appears that D'Asaro had left fencing behind him and embraced a life far removed from competitive fencing.
He'd become a hippie.
And he had long hair like Cyrano de Bergerac.
There are no mentions of D'Asaro participating in any fencing tournaments in 1965. His personal life was also in a state of upheaval. He left his wife Leonora and his 6-month-old son, Micheal Jr. In 1966, D'Asaro returned to fencing. He became a member of the New York Athletic Club team that included Alex Orban and Al Morales. That year, D'Asaro took third at Nationals, and the New York Athletic Club team took first in the saber team event. D'Asaro fenced internationally at Lake Balaton in Hungary. His USA team came in 5th at the Warsaw World Cup. By the time of the national championships in 1967, D'Asaro was ranked 3rd in the country in saber, A good showing at the Nationals would assure him a place on the U.S. team for the Pan Am Games and eventually the Olympics.
I recall going to my first national championships in 1967. It was in Santa Monica. We all heard about this Micheal D'Asaro.
And there was this full-out hippie sitting on the ledge. I walked by, little Daisy in the beard and the whole thing, and holy God. From somewhere in there came out, "Hey, Buzz, how you doing?" One of these things, it was Micheal.
Because this person, Micheal D'Asaro, was going to be fencing, a bunch of us kids went to watch the finals.
They announced him. He comes on the strip with his rose in his teeth, and he threw it out.
And he was the hero of every fencer that was probably under 25 years old.
In a repeat of D'Asaro's 1966 U.S. Nationals performance, D'Asaro came in third individually, and his New York Athletic Club team took first. D'Asaro had earned the points to be on the national team, yet he was still kept off the team going to Mexico.
I was a Pan American champion. Fencing that competition, I was third. They take the top 5, but they wouldn't take me on a team because my hair was too long.
The powers that were putting together the preparations for the Pan American Games in Winnipeg, Canada in 1967, came up to him and said, "Well, Mike, you're at the top of the list for being on the U.S. team again."
He was challenged by the American Olympic icon, Avery Brundage, who ran everything for the Olympic Committee, to either cut his hair or not be on the Olympic team.
If you look at those guys would get off the bus in the suit and tie and, the straight hair. I mean, he's the only one who's out there. They were calling out who'd made the Pan Am team, and they didn't call his name.
He didn't cut his hair.
Once he did that, I just had so much respect for him.
I mean, he had principles, he stood for something, and sometimes those are controversial.
I think he was pretty bitter about it.
And he had great hair. I wouldn't have them cut my hair either.
He was not allowed to compete on that Pan Am Games and the next year's Olympic Games.
I was so proud of him.
I think I respected him more for having stood his ground.
There was the good old boy network that took place, and Micheal was not part of that.
We got to keep the guys with long hair out of it. We got to keep the poor people out of it.
Frankly, they make up any reason to get one guy off the team so they can put their guy on, and so this happened to be long hair.
You do what you think is right, and you have to have principles. And he showed that when he wouldn't cut his hair just to make a team.
That's Micheal. It was his style.
Micheal, the rebel, the gunslinger, the anti-establishment, he liked to drop out.
He threw everything away because he had athletically qualified to make the Olympic team and just disappeared from everyone's lives.
He walked away from the sport the way he walked away from the rest of his life.
He felt he was a failure at what he was doing. And I don't know, he just got mad and threw everything away. Took all his trophies and threw them away. And
our team kind of broke off after that.
In leaving New York, he really was leaving his career.
Had he stayed with Eltish, he would have excelled as far as I'm concerned because, he was right up there.
Given the seasoning that both he and Al had, that might have given us some interesting results in '68.
If he had been a competitor for many more years, I think he would have changed the way that a lot of young competitors would look at fencing, and he might have shortened the journey from being an also-ran country that never saw good fencing up until, where we started doing well.
I think he could have won a world championship. He could have won an Olympic championship. He could have won anything.
People came to San Francisco to change their life. They left their old life behind them. Micheal left a whole complicated, real life behind him.
Moved to San Francisco, where he took acid every day for a year and ate brown rice and meditated.
Did the whole Haight-Ashbury hippie scene. It was great. It was fabulous.
While D'Asaro expanded his consciousness, he supported himself by selling newspapers in the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco. A few blocks away on Fillmore Street, the Halberstadt Fencing Club had lost its maestro and was in search of a new head coach.
We went to San Francisco to meet Hans Halberstadt, and when we got to Halberstadt Fencing Club, there was a sign on the window that saying the club was closed because Hans was sick, and he never recovered, and he died shortly after.
Chuck Selberg had left, and so we didn't have a coach.
I think they were even considering shutting it down.
Michael and I were selling Berkeley barb and oracles out of my Cadillac. And some guy comes up to him and says, "Micheal D'Asaro, what are you doing here?"
Jack Baker saw him selling a Berkeley barb and says, "Oh no, you can't do this."
Jack Baker, the chairman of the AFLA, came into the fencing shop one day when I was working and said, "Mike D'Asaro's in San Francisco. Jack, tell him to come and see me. I'd love to meet him, you know."
Mike went, okay.
D'Asaro and John McDougall met at the Halberstadt Fencers Club for what would be the start of the next chapter in D'Asaro's fencing journey.
Michael walked around, looked at the cell, and he said, "This place has good vibes." And I said, "Yeah, what's vibes?" And he said, "Vibrations, vibrations."
He had no idea or any desire to do such a thing because he thought he had left fencing behind.
I never in my life thought of coaching fencing. The thought had never entered my mind. But at that time, I needed a job.
Michael then looked around a little more and he said, "Look," he said, "you get me a job teaching fencing and I'll give you hippie lessons."
And there was an apartment there and all kinds of the guy's stuff and all the fencing equipment. And he says, "Yeah, I'll be the maestro."
I was living next door to Halberstadt. I got back from school one day, I looked out the window, and I saw two crazed hippies painting a Cadillac. Oh, that's the hippie guy who's now the fencing coach at Halberstadt.
He's a better hippie coach than a fencing coach.
Mike didn't go to any kind of a coaching classes or anything. He just started doing it.
He figured it out. And his role model, of course, was Csaba Eltes.
Was a natural teacher, no problem there.
Very difficult to teach yourself something and then be so highly successful.
It didn't take very long at all, and we didn't have room for any more. Okay, at San Francisco in '67, of course you have a hippie fencing master.
He was a hippie, but he was a Brooklyn hippie.
D'Asaro's reputation quickly drew fencers from all over the Bay Area. They came to see what he had learned as a top-ranked fencer and if he could teach those skills to them.
At that time, he was probably the most accomplished fencer, certainly on the West Coast, and I think that was a significant draw.
A friend of mine, a woman named Emily Johnson, said, guess who's coaching in Halberstadt now? And I said, who? And she told me Mike was there, and I thought that was really wonderful. And I said, good, I'm hurrying back.
But I said, what the hell, let's see if I can get lessons from D'Asaro.
He saw me fence and he asked my parents if they'd be willing to take me to take lessons from him in San Francisco.
Because I had heard that there was a energetic, cool, dynamic coach by the name of Mike D'Asaro.
Now here's this guy I'm looking at like, is that D'Artagnan?
He believed in discipline, and he taught a very simple, straightforward game.
Exactitude and high standards and stuff, I think, came from Csaba Eltes because his reputation is one of tolerating nothing but perfection.
Mike was very hard on the students, the better students.
The old coaching was, if you execute it the way I tell you, you will score. Michael's was, this is how you do it, now go out and use your head and score.
He was able to take what his fencing style, which was so very creative and thinking wise, and what's going to come next, or what do you feel is going to come next as to what should logically come next, and translate that into a lesson. To me, that was his strongest point.
He taught, do this, you do that. And Michael said, hit him. He instilled in you that love that he had for the sport.
During the lesson, he would really cut you. So you really had to parry, for example. Otherwise, you get nice bruises.
He had me doing so many lunges and advancing and retreating. I almost would get on the floor puking. He'd say, get up, come on, let's keep going.
He'd be casually with his legs crossed, talking to a colleague across the room, and he'd look over and he'd watch practice, and then he'd yell out, "You call that a lunge?" Despite his lack of formal training as a coach, D'Asaro's teaching did pay off for his students.
He basically cleaned up my game, and I won 2 more nationals with him.
I won all 3 weapons in under 19 West Coast Championships.
I won more under him than anybody else ever.
Somehow I managed to make the Sabre team, beating out several other potential candidates. Quite a surprise. But then I would mention that D'Asaro was my coach, and they would go, of course.
As usual, D'Asaro ran the club according to his own rules.
There was a 2-tier population at Halberstadt.
People who were very straight and didn't smoke, and they stayed in the salle all the time, and the people that did smoke, which was about half the people, would go out back and smoke all they wanted out there. Nobody bothered anybody else.
Smoked a lot of dope at Halberstadt.
At Halberstadt, you trained, you took a lesson, you went out.
Talking to Michael in the back room, late night stories. Michael, first time I saw you, I was looking out the window and I saw you with your buddy Jerry painting that Cadillac. What the hell was that about? We were on acid.
As the years progressed at Halberstadt's, D'Asaro started to think of coaching less as a part-time endeavor and more as an avocation.
I sort of marveled at his ability to do that job.
It was really kind of in the course of when I met him that he transitioned from being an accidental coach to saying, oh, maybe there's something in this. Maybe this is my life.
When you're coaching a team, there has to be discipline and schedules and all kinds of stuff, which didn't fit with my picture of Mike.
In 1970, D'Asaro accepted an invitation to be on the World Masters team that was going to take part in an international competition in London. It was a chance for D'Asaro to compete once again on the international stage and maybe show the AFLA what a mistake they made when they didn't select him for the 1967 Pan Am team.
Raul Sudre, who was my coach at Cornell, he came up with the idea of putting together a team of American fencing masters to create an American team for the World Master Championship.
And it was a great team.
Sudre picked Michael for the reason any fencing coach picks anyone for their team, because they're looking for the best.
The same people who are at the World Masters are the same people who are at the World Championship. For him to win that is the same thing as winning the World Championship.
He very much remained Michael the hippie, which for some of the other people on the team was difficult. The Geraces of the world. Because if you look at pictures from that, the hair is absolutely long. There he is in sandals.
He took that competition very seriously. He really, really got into the training. You would think that he was really a world-class fencer still.
He went to the World Masters and he won.
Well, that was an amazing eye-opener to watch everybody fencing and watch them win so many bouts.
And I think he wanted to make a statement to the AFLA that he was not gone.
Being on the World Masters team had the added benefit of putting D'Asaro in contact with some of the top coaches in the country. He was invited to help at seminars at Cornell University. He was selected to coach on the junior world teams in 1973 and 1974.
Really met him at the Junior World Championships in 1974 in Istanbul, Turkey.
And always gave me the confidence that I can make an impact in this tournament, even though there were no junior fencers from the United States ever made the final. So real fast forward, that day, it was a 2-day tournament, I made the final and came in 4th.
One of the things that Michael always sort of encouraged the athletes to do is that, when you go to fencing tournaments, it's not about just fencing, it's about the entire experience. Yes, you want to be successful what you do in fencing, but it's really about the overall life experience, and that's something that he reinforced.
So he was very instrumental in us, the U.S. Sabre team, getting a silver medal in the Pan American Games in Mexico City.
I think he was extremely excited and honored because Olympic coach, good title.
In 1972, I graduated from high school, went off to college, went to Cornell. Cornell, being in the Ivy League, fenced other Ivy League schools. And one of those was Penn. Penn had shall we say, a much more colorful team than most of the era. Cesar recruited heavily out of the black community in Philadelphia, was colorblind, and just wanted great athletes. The Penn team was pretty cool. Cesar was a traditional fencing master, i.e. a maestro. Cesar had always been maestro, but given the sort of cultural change that was taking place there, the guys fencing for him shortened maestro to Stro. I couldn't help but notice that they simply reflexively referred to Cesar as Stro. I came back for my first break, Christmas break, reporting to Michael, and he was saying, what was it like? I said, it was great, wonderful, loved college fencing. And an interesting thing, there's a phenomena at the University of Pennsylvania where they call Cesar Stro. Everybody laughed, and we sort of picked up on it ourselves and would call Michael Stro. It was almost facetiously. Michael D'Asaro took that and ran with it. He called Stro repeatedly from the get-go. He kind of insisted on it. Meanwhile, I went off back to college. But when I came back that summer, Micheal D'Asaro was the Stro. I think D'Asaro really stuck it to him, stuck it on him. Michael loved it. It was cool, and it reflected his place in American fencing. He wasn't a maestro in the traditional sense. He was the new version of a fencing coach, and that was a Stro.
D'Asaro became a popular choice for top-level coaching jobs around the country. Hugo Costello at NYU and Chaba Eltesh both offered him coaching jobs in New York. D'Asaro chose to remain in the Bay Area and took a job at San Jose State University, coaching the women's fencing team.
I hired Micheal D'Asaro to build the women's fencing team because they had to meet the Title IX criteria.
He was the wild coach from the West Coast, as opposed to one of these staid conservative coaches from the East. Selecting him, it was on his merits, purely.
Back then, the Bay Area was like nothing in fencing.
We were outcasts over here on the West Coast. There wasn't a really strong West Coast program.
You can only get strong in fencing in California if you work with Micheal D'Asaro.
For the new job at San Jose State, D'Asaro opted to make some lifestyle changes, one of which would have been unthinkable just a few years prior.
One day I walked into the fencing club and he'd cut off all his hair.
The hair was cut, he had the straight lace. Very different Michael than was the pre-San Jose days.
D'Asaro was able to quickly attract top-level talent to the San Jose State fencing program.
Micheal D'Asaro, because of his charisma and incredible skills, drew people to San Jose State.
He did the ultimate recruit for me, marriage, and then got Vinnie Stacy. And
we had met Michael, I think, at the national championships.
I met two ladies on a junior team that I coached back then who were really impressed with my coaching, and they were ready to go to college, and they came here.
Okay, my name is Stacy Johnson. I'm originally from Texas. Vince and I both are, but we just moved to California especially to train with Michael.
And we were both like, oh my God, he's just so fantastic.
I wanted to be with the best women fencers.
And we got ourselves out to California and started to study under him, and we started to get incredible results.
He had the most dynamic women's program by far.
They dominated NCAA.
They were legendary.
Didn't have a result in Halberstadt, didn't have a whole lot of results here in LA. San Jose, they crushed it.
Maybe he was a former hippie, maybe he was a party guy, but the reputation was also he had an amazing group of fencing athletes.
There was a Jekyll and Hyde quality to D'Asaro's reputation.
We were told, stay away from Micheal D'Asaro.
He is brutal.
Kind of the scum of the fencing world.
He learned everything from this Hungarian maestro named Chaba, who would hit people.
As I grew older as a young teen, I was like, titillated by that idea.
He did draw the rebels. I mean, look at Greg and Peter and Vinnie and Stacy, and because that's the kind of people that could understand him.
While D'Asaro did manage to build the top-ranked women's fencing program in the nation, when it came time to build the men's program, recruitment proved far more difficult.
He couldn't get any saber guys because they all wanted to be on the East Coast.
Most of the saber fencers he had there, he created.
He plucked me out of the projects in New York, and I came to San Jose State, and my life has forever changed. I don't think I would have survived back there.
Everybody that I saw that he worked with for any sort of period of time improved tremendously.
I knew Michael was a saber fencer. I didn't know what he knew about épée, and I was the épée national champion, junior champion, under 20, So he said, well, let's fence. And he proceeded to beat me thoroughly and handily.
By that time, Michael had taken over and turned first into a West Coast power, and, then national.
I wanted to be an Olympian, so felt like it might be smart for me to study there.
Mike settled. He have wife, family, he have house, he have garden.
In his new role as head coach at San Jose State, D'Asaro kept some things the same in his coaching style, but did a complete turnaround in others.
So he ran practices with a stopwatch and a clipboard, totally opposite than he had been in San Francisco.
He realized he had to get all these people moving. And when you're talking about college students, some of them may be kind of interested, but not showing it at all. And
So he really had to work hard to keep them going.
Michael's teaching at Halberstadt and at San Jose State was the same. What was different was that he was responsible for so much more.
From a hippie to a law-abiding citizen.
He'd have a whistle and bark orders and this kind of thing, like a basketball coach.
In San Jose State, he was a very rough coach. Lots of yelling, lots of screaming, lots of cursing.
He would berate you, it physically difficult, he would hit you.
It taught me how I don't want to coach.
He had this amazing ability to be sensitive as well. And this was the contradiction of Stro.
Just as strong and mean and loud as he was when you were fucking it up, that's just as great as he was when you were doing it well.
It's possible that D'Asaro remembered his days in the Army as a pentathlete and the benefits of physical training when he made conditioning a priority for the fencers at San Jose State.
Stro physically was always pushing himself and his students in ways that fencing at the time wasn't doing.
For that first month, you didn't touch a weapon.
We didn't do a lot of free fencing.
Idealistically speaking, people should be doing this for 6 months to a year before they even touch a weapon.
We were all super fit.
We are going to make athletes.
And the first thing he says is 2 miles.
You're running to the South Campus, to the stadium, you're going to do sprints, you're going to do stairs. You know, you suffer together. And you also find out how far you can push yourself.
Lessons, drilling, footwork, fencing. You know, we get to do all of that in a day.
Between the athleticism and lessons with Stro, you couldn't be killed with ordinary weapons.
He was there working his team, you know, harder himself than they were willing to work. I mean, he was infusing them with passion.
I'm a coach myself. I don't know where he got all of that energy.
D'Asaro placed an extraordinary emphasis on footwork in his training.
Michael was a taskmaster in those footwork sessions.
He would have the class do like 100 lunges before they ever started the lesson or did anything else.
So many freaking lunges.
The footwork, the footwork, the footwork, the footwork, the footwork.
I also have these pictures of Stro with his long hair doing footwork with the waves.
And we definitely went over to Santa Cruz and did footwork just like our coach Micheal D'Asaro used to do.
D'Asaro, I think, was able to get some of these kids at a relatively young age where he could instill in them the proper fencing technique and the proper conditioning that was required.
Well, I don't know if he was good with beginners, but I think he inspired beginners.
D'Asaro believed in individualized lessons. Everyone was trained according to their own abilities.
Michael's lessons were not formulaic.
Michael would make it up each time for each person.
He would teach his students how to think for themselves and come up with their own style that fits them.
Because he really was able to adapt, like any good coach, adapt to any student's ability.
Greg didn't fence like anybody else. He was twitchy. Greg was the only one I knew who flicked. Shipman was kind of the same way. You know, he sort of stay out. Where's the distance? Maybe I'm up here. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm down here. Where all the other fencers were like, you know, regimented 4, 6, up 7, 8. It's his students that do that, and that's incredible. I mean, Joy was the same way. Gay was the same way. No, actually, Gay wasn't. Gay was a perfect classic fencer, so he could do anything.
Every time you step on the strip, you give your best performance. Every time. Whether it's practice, whether it's a bout, you always give your best performance.
He could be very intense, like just so focused on you. And he could just draw out of you a really high level of performance.
D'Asaro challenged his students constantly. You could argue his methods bordered on a form of cruel and unusual punishment.
He came from the mean daddy school of giving lessons.
Michael's idea about the lesson was it would be so difficult and so grueling.
Any lesson you take, any fencing you do,
It should be so much harder than the competition, so when you get to the competition, it's easy.
He said that's why he was such a abusive bastard on the strip. It's because after lessons with him, what can they possibly do to you?
Fencing you is nothing like being yelled at by Michael.
He knocked the weapon out of my hand, took a shoe, picked it up with his weapon, and flew it at me, and then said, "I'm done tonight."
And he could be in a bad mood and ask you to make a parry 4, and you think you're gonna make a perfect tiny parry 4, and he would whack you on the head and go, "Too big."
He whacked the shit out of me.
The guys who were consistently bleeding at the end of a lesson were the saber guy. And they weren't they were pumped up by it.
When he was a young man, a coach abusing an athlete was acceptable. We didn't call it abuse. We said the coach was trying to motivate the student.
He would hit me once, I wouldn't let him hit me again. So I'd keep the distance or I'd make that parry.
So Michael was abused by his coach, and he brought that to coaching.
But how much was too much? Did he cross the line into abuse?
It was just Michael and myself, and he broke me.
The theory was that you had to break somebody down completely and then rebuild them.
Michael always tried to feel out his pupil, see what his pupil was capable of, so that he wouldn't push it beyond what the student was capable of.
Just another lesson with Stro where nothing you did was right. Everything you did was wrong. And not only was everything wrong, but everything was wrong and you were a bad person for doing everything wrong. And everything was wrong, you were a bad person for doing everything wrong, and you'll never do anything right.
He's not taking it easy on me, and I actually dropped.
No, wrong, and you're stupid and you're wrong. That's not a fucking parry. This is a fucking parry. It's a repost. You call that a fucking repost?
And I thought the lesson was over. And he said, get up.
And I'm just so fed up. Can't do anything right, and so I'm hitting him as hard as I can, and tears are starting to stream down my face because I'm so fucking pissed.
And the lesson continued until I dropped maybe 3, 4, 5 times.
And I'm hitting him as hard as I can. I'm hitting him as hard as I can. I'm hitting him as hard as I can.
One of the few times that I wished I had never been a fencer.
Why are you hitting me so hard? Because I want to kill you.
He broke me to 98%.
Oh, okay. Nice and easy now. Nice and easy. That was pretty good. Okay, nice. Okay, now lunch. Right, good. Okay, good lesson.
He never did that after that, but one time, just to show that when you're fencing, you don't give up.
It would never occur to me to quit. He was mean and miserable and horrible to me too. But I just thought, well, that's Michael. Like,
when you become a varsity coach, by definition, you have to strive to produce a winning team. Whether the kids are happy or not isn't what is going to necessarily impress the athletic director and get another year's contract.
Some of D'Asaro's teaching examples owed more to the streets of Redhook than traditional, old-school fencing lessons.
He would use analogies that were often very street.
The Saccone Perry one was a classic because this is pure Stro.
I remember someone asking, like, how do you take Perry Saccone?
You know what Saccone is?
It's like you got a beer bottle.
And you break it on the bar before you cut the motherfucker.
That motion, when you crack the bottle, is Perry Saccone.
Oh, and it kind of just clicked. We know exactly what you mean.
Saccone, we know how to Perry Saccone now.
The formidable passion D'Asaro brought to coaching in the gym didn't translate very well to competitions.
There's different elements about strip coaching, tactics, emotions, all that kind of stuff. And I think he would have been very good about that.
He was not a great strip side coach.
He was almost regularly kicked out of the gym.
He was great in the cell. He was terrible at fencing tournaments. In fact, we banned him.
He would be yelling at us.
And he could get too emotional and get us too upset. So we kept him away.
The one thing no one could question was the fact D'Asaro pushed himself to be better as a coach, just as hard as he pushed his athletes to be better fencers.
I cannot express how much this guy, all the time looking to everybody who is doing anything, can he learn something and improve his fences?
A lot of other coaches seem to think, I know it all. Michael never said he knew it all. And every year he would have new information. He always sought out new information and would come in and inflict it on us, i.e. 100 lunges with a brick.
I never considered myself a coach because I never thought I knew enough myself. I thought I was learning, always learning.
Mike, sponge. He's one take what he's thinking right for fencing and put in his so he can give something more to his students.
He was the first person I definitely worked with who brought in some different drills that were all about the mentality of fencing.
We did sports psychology work, and that was really kind of the nascence of that.
I think great teachers create the space for students to flourish in their own way.
Michael would say he only has us for a couple hours a week, if you can do more, do more.
Michael didn't impress me as a deep thinker. He was curious, and he would pursue a theme, but I don't think he was a deep thinker in the sense of a scholarly mind.
If you just talk to him briefly, you'd be like, what? He's an inarticulate mook.
He was a fabulous tactician, but he didn't have the words for tactics.
He was smart, but he wasn't articulate.
Michael taught by example.
He could perform, he could show you. Just grab the weapon and look, this is how you do it.
Then you listen to what his words are and you're like, he's somebody who's got a ton of depth.
And yet, like any great fencer, there's something hidden. He might appear friendly, but he's gonna try to soundly defeat you.
He could suss suss out what a person is about very quickly. But we also say that about fencing. You know, if you're on the strip with somebody, if you're fencing with somebody, you know what they're about.
You really do meet somebody on the fencing strip because you get to know who they are. And sadly and unfortunately, you get to know who you are.
You can't be that good and not understand things at a really deep level.
Although he looked the part of a conforming member of society, some things about D'Asaro never changed.
He wasn't a typical fencing coach. He was not straight-laced.
There was a favorable view of substance abuse with that team.
When it came to his job, he was sober as he needed to be.
He never drank, he never smoked, he never dropped acid that I knew of when we worked.
After we'd won, we'd get really drunk.
As soon as we got in, he'd be drinking. Seemed only fair, because probably about a third of the team was drinking during the tournaments.
We worked hard at San Jose State. We worked very, very hard. We trained very, very hard. And we played hard.
I know there was a lot of marijuana use and some cocaine use. You know, nobody drug tests a coach.
Michael believed that fencing was more than just a physical sport. There was a spiritual and certainly an intellectual side.
We go to Micheal D'Asaro's house for Christmas, and everybody is given a little baggie.
He gave the members of the fencing team magic mushrooms.
With a little, note, go to the mountains in Santa Cruz or wherever with a friend and just have a nice day. And
I did take those mushrooms, and they were amazing.
We went out to Big Basin out in the redwoods or in the forest, and we ate our shrooms, and we really had this kind of Alice in Wonderland, profound experience.
And it was expected that we would take these and it was going to be a mind-expanding experience.
Did it affect my fencing and make me a better competitor? I ended up winning the Western Intercollegiates and Pacific Coast Championships. So I believe that there was a connection.
I mean, that's outrageous now to think of a coach giving illegal hallucinogens to the whole team.
And Michael was very much a shaman, and that was part of his charisma, that it wasn't just all macho, hit them first, hit them harder, that there was a broader context to being able to make the touch first.
But we kind of well, that was Michael. Oh, is that what the coach wants us to do? That sounds like a wonderful idea. So there's this kind of metaphysical quality that he tried to imbue and inspire in us.
Harsh training methods and quirky behavior are only acceptable as long as they produce positive results. Despite all the rumors and turmoil surrounding the San Jose State team, no one can claim they weren't successful.
It all seemed to respond to him in a way that allowed him to bring out the very best in them.
You can always tell a pretty good coach when there's a certain consistency, from year to year to year, not just based on some stars. Of course, you're going to have a really good year if you have some stars.
His team was the baddest, partiest, hardest working, most winningest. We loved being Michael's students.
Other people's views of D'Asaro weren't quite as favorable.
I took one of my students to one of his workshops and suggested that she even go to San Jose, take some lessons. But Michael decided that the situation was not that he was going to augment that student's instruction, but that he was going to take that student. I remember one of the kitchen table conversations we had where Michael was saying to me, look, this is how it is. There are big fish and there are little fish, and the big fish eat the little fish until the bigger fish comes along, and then the bigger fish eats that one.
By 1983, D'Asaro was no longer being chosen to coach the national squad. Drug and alcohol use were cited as the reasons for the ban.
Again, there are so many sides to him. There's him the great fencer, him the great coach, him the not so great dad, but him the great mentor.
He was super intelligent in how to teach fencing. He was teaching 3 weapons. I don't think that's an easy thing.
Some people who know him marginally will know him as hard drinking, boozing, drug taking, madman.
The fact that he looked like he did drugs, and then it turns out that he did, might have really negatively affected how Americans viewed this person who they thought, maybe unfairly, maybe fairly, should have been an ambassador for American fencing.
He really embraced the hippie life and all that went with it. So there were some problems.
No, we're not having some guy who essentially advocates drug use as one of our coaches. I mean, we're not that stupid.
I did know a lot of the East Coast fencing politics hated Micheal D'Asaro.
It certainly was not a question that his his skills had not been recognized.
And then there was an incident after 81 World University Games that he was kind of hanging out and they had gone out drinking after the tournament was over and so on and so forth. They came back and then they were able to use really a minorly nothing, but then use it as an excuse to sort of blackball him from being a coach from that point on, which included the '84 Olympics, which he had 3 students on the team, myself being one of them.
The decision was regrettable, and even the people making it didn't really want to do it, but they felt they had no choice.
When he was working, he was very serious. And I know because you couldn't be stoned and be working with me at the level without me knowing it.
He never missed a practice. I never missed a lesson. He still ran the hardest footwork sessions.
In 1985, at only 47 years of age, D'Asaro retired from San Jose State University. The university opted to cancel the varsity fencing program at the same time.
It was really sad to see the program stop.
I think he simply sort of burnt out by all the constant pressure.
When I was living with him, he was drinking heavily, smoking pot, mushrooms, things like that. And then also he's like, well, I'm gonna become a vegetarian. We're all gonna move up to Oregon and live off the land.
D'Asaro decided to move to Ashland, Oregon, an area he had looked into with his old fencing pal, Charles Selberg.
I know he just wanted to cash out and buy a house without having any payments.
We moved into Oregon and left San Jose State. I don't think there was anything at San Jose State that caused Michael to want to do this. It was just another opportunity for him to drop out.
I think had he been in that same path as he was and being selected and participating, I think he would have deferred those things until a later time, maybe after 84, 85.
He stopped working at the high level that he had. So it was some sort of a retirement, but at the same time, his coaching was still, right on the money.
D'Asaro's marriage to Gay did not survive the move to Oregon.
When you have, I think, a big age difference like there is between them, you're having these different experiences of evolution in your life.
He was her first love. She was, 14, 15, even younger when they met. And then they got married when she's 20, and they're together, through her 30s, so like enough already.
As she ages, she's mellowing. As Michael aged, he did not mellow.
They always seem like chalk and cheese. They always seem like, what is Gay doing with Michael?
I think it simply got old, and Mike's drinking certainly was part of that.
I essentially went from my father to my father, and it was time to disengage from my father.
If I had to guess, you just outgrew him.
At the time, Gay wanted to move forward with a career, and she was working on becoming a clinical psychologist.
So Michael and I went into this psychotherapy training. After 3 sessions, Michael dropped out because he couldn't be around people and reveal himself. And that was so significant to me in my life where I was growing and delving deeper and growing, and he was caving in. And that impacted me so much. And I never could see him the same after that. A little sad here. So I realized it was time for me to be independent and continue my growth and exploration. And I told Michael I wanted to separate.
He was devastated.
When I chose to leave him, he truly still loved me.
So that whole idyllic lifestyle that they were putting together up in Ashland was gone.
D'Asaro decided to leave Oregon and accepted a coaching position in Los Angeles.
When I heard that Gay and Michael were divorcing, the moment I heard it, I told Ted Katzoff, I'm calling Michael.
First, when I met him, he was the coach of the United States. I was like a demigod to me. But then when I met him again at Westside, he looked a little bit like a bum from New York City.
He grew his hair back out in Los Angeles. He was back to having this long mane of hair again.
In many ways had gone back to his Haight-Ashbury days at that point in time.
I saw this guy with long hair and these skull rings and different things, coming up to me, and he's looking at me as if he's recognizing me. And I was like, who is this guy? And then I looked into his eyes and I'm like, oh my gosh, Stro.
The big change was when he and Gay split and he moved to Los Angeles. And then that's where I really think he started to become more, less of that fighter and more of maybe more philosophical.
That was a totally different guy. He was giving lessons in flip-flops and he's laughing.
I'm teaching fencing now as a means of personal expression, personal development, get in tune with yourself.
And people are like, oh, your father's the best, he's so sweet. I'm like, sweet? Are you insane?
I honestly don't recall why I ended up just, trying a lesson with Micheal. I knew he was a kind of unmistakable character, and he was somebody who I knew had been a great fencer and had coached a lot of great athletes.
He was giving wonderful, great lessons and making great corrections and really helping people along without having to be verbally crazy.
He was just, of course, so charismatic and so good.
But at work, he was always a little bit on the sloppy side.
When he came to Los Angeles and thought, I'm going to take lessons again. I can't fence competitively, I've got a knee, but I can take a lesson.
He had a huge smile on his face every time I saw him. I mean, he was somebody who was laughing all the time. He didn't live lavishly, that's for sure. He lived in a simple apartment.
He seemed to get along with anybody and everybody. He just seemed to be, just knowledgeable, good-natured, affable, powerful, funny.
I felt that there was something lost. Because the last time I saw him was with Charles Selberg in the Colstein Valley, and then now he's in LA, in some apartment teaching fencing, and not his Sal.
There was a sense of frustration because he had tried to positively change the sport for years and years and years, and at the end, he never really felt that he did.
As the 1990s drew to a close, D'Asaro's health started to fail. He beat colon cancer only to succumb to another form of the disease.
The first thing that started to happen that I knew something was wrong was he was getting angry at people at the club for encroaching on his space.
There I was one night, taking a lesson with Micheal. We were having a wonderful time.
I had a lesson over here, he had a lesson next to me, and he kept floating into my strip.
He was losing his equilibrium, and he was slanting off.
And I smacked him in the head. I'm like, get the fuck off my strip, stay in your own strip.
And he was getting pissed off at people. Watch your space! Stop bothering me!
Micheal asked me to do an action. I did. And then he oriented himself for the next action, pointing, looking straight ahead at 6 o'clock, he was pointing off like 8 o'clock.
And he didn't realize that he was going slanted.
Micheal, what's going on?
Are you okay?
In the middle of that lesson, his brain tumor kicked in.
It was a glioblastoma that was right in a place they couldn't operate on.
He broke in that lesson and never came back.
D'Asaro attended his last national championship in 2000.
He walked into this tournament and he was very puffy. His skin was like alligator and gray, and oh, it just shocked the crap out of me.
I look to the mic, I feel very, very sad.
And he was sitting just looking out over everything that was happening. It was after that I realized that he was there saying goodbye.
Seeing Micheal, this strong guy, being just worn down by his illness, man, it was pretty bad.
Stro was, down in LA. Brain tumors progressing.
He knew he had some kind of fatal thing happening.
A lot of people down in LA were just like, yeah, whatever. He's just going to drink himself to death. And they didn't seem to have much of a use for him. And Connie Yu, because Connie Yu is both a smart person and a compassionate person, was just like, we always have Stro come up once a year and do a camp. Let's have Stro come up and do a camp.
The students who had learned from him over these workshops, when they saw him at that last workshop, there was one kid, Charlie Knable, he just said, it's awful seeing Micheal like this.
So we do the camp. I, stand in for him. It would go well. He'd field questions. He was kind of leaning against one of the pillars. He could still move his hands somewhat, so that was fine. It was a good reminder of how good he was, that even in that condition, that he was still engaging, he could still teach.
I think he had resolved in his own mind what was going to take place because he had lived that way. He was able to meet things head on.
Between the drugs they were giving him that affect the brain so badly, there wasn't a whole lot of, hey, let's clear up past 40 years. We never really had that moment that, why did you do this? Why did you leave us? But I miss him. I've got lots of questions.
D'Asaro kept teaching right up until the end.
So he lights up and he's smoking. He goes, You know I was a vegetarian for a while, right? I said, yeah, when you live with gay. So what do I get? Fucking stomach cancer. I beat that. You know, I've been smoking since I was 12. How are my lungs? Perfect. What do I get? Fucking brain tumor. It just goes to show something's gonna get you. Just don't worry about it.
Later on, we realized that, you know, that was an amazing attitude in the face of imminent death, that he didn't care.
A few months before he died, he visited me, and he had no hair. He was bald from chemotherapy, and he was barely walking. This man who had been this cat, this predator, this cheetah, this panther on the strip, who had humbled me in my physical prime, he'd humbled me. Here he can barely walk. He needs help going to the bathroom. And he's told me about how difficult it was for him to ask for help. He told me that his mother told him, you never ask for anything. And he said, but Peter, he said, that's not the hardest part. It's not asking. It's allowing the help, allowing someone to help me go to the bathroom, allowing someone to catch my arm.
He would tell us that you can only control what you can control. You can control the fact that you have practiced more than anyone else. You can control you're in better shape than anyone else. You can control your technique. You can control your distance. You can control all of that. You can't control the referee. You can't control the opponent you're going to have. You can't control that stuff. But if you do control and are better prepared, all the things you can control, your chances of success are much better. And so I continue to use that today.
I had this wonderful, sweet dinner at Connie Yu's house. He was so full of life and joyful and joking with us, you know, let me show you my brain scan. And to see him in this condition, and then to see him still so full of life was a lesson I'll never forget.
The three of us came together when he was very ill, rented a hotel suite, and we stayed and visited him before he passed.
It was kind of bittersweet. We talked about old times.
And it was kind of the perfect goodbye.
But it was so sad to see him in that condition, you know, after seeing the vibrant Micheal all those years.
We had fun and reminisced and thanked him.
I think he was accepting of it. It wasn't going to be a battle down to the wire, you know, like Cyrano de Bergerac, you know, fencing against the specter of death.
Micheal always taught us was, it's not over till the fat lady sings.
You're like on a cliff, holding your fingers, and it's 4-0, but you have the ability to bring it up to 4-4 and to win.
However tired you are, however beat up, however much pain you're in, you can still go further.
He believed he was going to beat it until he didn't.
I think it was December 12th, and Anna Harris called me and told me my brother passed away.
When I found out that he had passed away, it was part of me passing away.
As of today, we're living in a grayer world. Because Micheal really, for me, as a fencing coach and as a person who knew him and knew of him and heard stories about him, he really did make the world a more colorful place.
He produced good fencers.
He had fencers on every Olympic team from 76 to 88.
He was part of opening the door for women's sports because he took us seriously when so many other males in the sport of fencing were poo-pooing us.
His legacy, like any great master, it resides within his students. So many of his top students are still around as coaches.
He was not of the establishment, but his champions became part of the establishment.
He's the pebble, and then we are the ripples.
I don't think I would have been doing now what I'm doing at this level of success without being able to have the same passion and that he helped instill in me.
We carried on what he gave us.
Greg Maciel's kid is doing phenomenal, and I think you can trace that directly to the influence of Micheal D'Asaro.
My students came back with 3 medals from the Olympics, something that would have been sort of unheard of.
Elevated the game, he elevated the consciousness, he elevated the art.
He opened the door for fencers around the country by producing Olympians on the West Coast when we were all supposed to be from the East Coast.
A lot of people are dead now we don't talk about because they're not worth talking about. And he certainly is someone that is.
When he was inducted to the San Jose State Hall of Fame, I spoke, and I called him an asshole. But he was cruel. He could be really horrible, you know, but he was so many things.
And that was one of the things I remember, you know, him really, you know, building me up, you know, making me believe in myself more.
She said, Michael always believed in me, and that made the difference.
He's just a mentor, somebody who could take fencing and use it as a metaphor for life.
Once you know him, it's kind of difficult to forget about him.
When I think about this coach that had the hugest impact, really made everything I was as a fencer, it was Stro. And yet, technically, I probably worked with him for the least amount of time.
I remember asking him, like, why are you a coach, Stro? You know, and he goes, it's all I know how to do.
I miss him.
He was a natural referee, everything about fencing, he could eat it.
But I would not have traded that time for anything. That was formative.
And he helped me make the Olympic team. He really helped me make the Olympic team.
Michael took me in and tolerated my ignorance in the beginning, which was hard for him. He really made me the fencer that I was.
He did everything on his own terms. You know, look, I'm gonna prove to you that I am the best, no matter what I'm wearing, no matter how I look, no matter what my hair length is, no matter who I'm fucking. I'm the best.
He's a very complex person, and that's, I mean, that to me was how I remember him.
You know, sometimes when I'm in a bit of a spot, or somebody is, you know, rubbing me wrong, or something's going wrong, I can hear Michael saying, well, fuck you.
Thank you, Micheal D'Asaro. Thank you, Stro.
Taskmaster, a shaman, a leader, and just a brilliant fencing Stro.